Hey, John.
Oh, Nick, here we are. Here we are.
One week away. The tension is rising.
Yeah, there's rumors that the first 12 chapters have dropped today in German.
In German, yeah. So
Um,
there is, I think, a machine translation into English, but even I have some standards. So normally I get the hint of a leak, and then I'm straight away there. I've resisted this one because it's a machine translation. If the English text dropped, I'll be absolutely there. But
I
just
mean,
the
Nick,
opportunity.
this has turned into a thing, isn't it? That
Yeah.
Team Rowling just can't do a release right. You know that we're getting well, you know the history of this. Yeah, they release a few chapters,
Yeah.
but they release it so that you can use the search function, and you can put a definite article in, and you can read the whole book.
Yes.
And that's now somebody in Germany decided to drop the German version of this.
So I understand that this was released as a PDF, so it's physically separate from the rest of the ebook, so it's not possible to search anything else. It's an unusual way of doing it. Even a copy protected sort of PDF is a strange way of doing it, and I can't imagine the English publishers in the UK or US using that method. But the same thing with the Audible release. So we had like 5 minutes of Audible, which I know you and I have listened to. And then
there's a
that
transcript
disappeared.
of. I mean, someone immediately put a transcript up, so it's
Yeah. But that now has disappeared.
That's
So
right. The link went down.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So now I guess we're a week away from publication. I think it's entirely possible we won't see any more early releases before 2nd September.
the reason I know about this is that someone who follows Hogwarts Professor saw that 12 chapters were down, read them on Reddit, came back and said, "Hey, John, 12 chapters are available, machine translation." And several of your predictions above, because I posted about the 5-minute Audible thing, have come true. And so I read through my discussion of the 5-minute thing. I don't think I made any predictions.
Well, that's how you've now got 100% record, John.
I mean, woo! Let's stop the train. I mean, I'm getting off. No, I will. Well, I don't know. I'm in the middle of my reread, as I guess we'll discuss today. And I'm astonished, Nick, at the stuff that the rereaders, they're not talking about in terms of Archon Recce conversations. I mean, really amazing that these people are probably on their 7th or 8th reread of some of these books and are not saying, "Oh yeah, well that reminds me of this." Really. Anyway, we'll talk about that. We got a lot to talk about today. Really, we're getting an avalanche of rolling tweets and essays and things to talk.
So yeah, I think the key piece that Rowling has published this week was an essay on her website. Now she threatened a few weeks ago. She offered her services to write a review of Nikola Sturgeon's new memoir, free of charge to any publication that wants to print her. I think her PR people had a quiet word. A couple of columnists that followed her said offering your services for free is a really bad idea. So I think she thought about this and she's published it on her website. And I think the key takeaway, it's no surprise, of course, she doesn't like the memoir. and
Nikola Sturgeon and Rowling.
yeah,
Oh,
amazingly, she has a different take on Nicola Sturgeon's time in office. But the key conceit was um, she used it as a compare and contrast to Stephenie Meyer's Twilight series. Now, I have to confess, I'm fairly new to reading literature anyway. Oh, you okay?
yep, we're good. I
I'm
just happen to have
I'm
a
fairly
copy of a book I wrote.
I'm fairly new to reading literature, and it's only in the last year that I've swallowed my own conceit about reading children's fiction or young adult fiction. So, on your recommendation, I've read all of Suzanne Collins' work and thoroughly
Oh,
loved them, but I haven't yet got round to reading any of the Twilight books. Now, I know back in the day there was quite a lot of fandom critique between the Potters and the Twilight guys.
Twihard.
Yeah.
They're called Twihards.
So uh, so what's your take on this? What's your take on because Rowling's written fairly dismissively in this piece about the Twilight series.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. I mean, I wrote a book on this. I mean, my one of my daughters, now a nun, read the Twilight books and said to me, "Dad, I can't stop reading these. These are really good. I'm loving these." She was 16 or 17 years old, and she said, "But there's something wrong with them. Yeah, there's something that's not quite right about these books." She says, "But I get kind of a Harry Potter vibe with it, so I'm interested. Want to know that." Now that was on top of an avalanche of people that were writing to me when Deathly Hallows came out that were really excited about Twilight. A lot of them were people that were really into literary alchemy, and they said, "Down, John, it has black, white, and red covers. You know, come on, there it is. It's right there." Um, yeah. Well, um, life is too short to read vampire romance books, right? And so I really put it off. And then my daughter asked me to do it, so I picked up the first book, and I found them really engaging. Um, Eventually, I read all of them, and I wrote a book about it. Easily, of all my books, this is the least. I mean, this if you're into John Granger trivia or whatever, you know, this book, you know, when people write to me and say, "Oh, I read your book Spotlight about the Twilight novels. It was so good," and I was like, "So you're the person who bought it," you know. Um, Seriously though, James Thomas at Pepperdine, he read the Twilight books because he was so tired of his colleagues who knew James as an expert on Edgar Allan Poe and William Faulkner and Shakespeare. I mean, James Thomas is the real deal, and he was neck deep into Harry Potter. We wrote 2 books on it. And his colleagues were like, "Really, James? You know, Harry Potter?" And he says, "Have you read any of them?" "Well, no, of course not." You know, and he was so tired of that response. You know, people not willing to, you know, all of their students had read all these books, you know, 4,100 pages of novels, and they couldn't be troubled to read the books that all of their kids had in the back of their thing. So James read the Twilight books, and he thought absolute slop. He hated them, but he read them all so he could say that with a straight face. And then he read my book, and he said, "John, first of all, this is the best book you've ever written." He says, "And I'm a big fan of your books." So I think this came out in like 2010 or something. And he said, and but it's because you're explaining why people love these books. You're explaining all the Mormon stuff that we don't get. You know, he said that he was afraid when his children were growing up in California. He was more afraid of LDS than of LSD. He said the Mormons are so big in that part of California. I mean that was. He says, and I don't know anything about that. So you filled all those blanks in. But it's a typical thing that people say that Meyer sold, and the latest numbers are from 2022, that she sold 160 million plus books. And so I'm thinking that's, today probably about 170. Just okay, great, because they're still selling. That that happened, but that they, as Rowling suggested in this essay, that those were all tween girls. Those are all idiot readers. And this is really weird because Meyer is a huge fan of J.K. Rowling. When she was asked to say, what would you ask your favorite writers, living or dead? What would you ask them? And here I'm going to quote from my own book, because you're not going to find this if you look for it, The first thing she said was, I'd love to talk to J.K. Rowling about secrecy and crazy antagonistic fans and her writing process and what her everyday life is like. Then she went on to talk about Orson Scott Card, and then she said, I'd like to ask Jane Austen how much of herself is in her stories. Now, Meyer, people talk about her as like she's some sort of moron. One reads on average a book a day. She had her favorite professor at BYU is an international Tolkien scholar, now retired. She's and she reads closely. I think a large. She does the Soul Triptych, she does the Literary Alchemy, and she does the circular writing as well. She got Rowling's work at a level that almost none of her fans got, and wrote a book on the model. And it sold 170 million copies, and because she's not a great stylist, we look down her nose. Stephen King said, "Oh, she can't write away out of a paper bag." Da 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 da. I'm like, wow, okay, Stephen. The angels don't sing when they read your prose either, Stephen. Anyway. Rowling though has so Meyer. First of all, she what questions would you ask? I want to talk to you about antagonistic fans. I want to hear about your writing process. And then about Jane Austen, I want to know how much of yourself is in the books. Meyer was clearly disturbed at how much of herself was in her own books, which is, talk about, she is clearly, she may be, I think almost certainly is the writer that Rowling is referencing when she says that all lake, no shed. That, really hits the thing in the zeitgeist of the people about what they're about and brings all these things up. Excuse me. But Rowling has nothing but disdain for Twilight and romantasy in general. Here's a writer that she should definitely want to be communicating with, because she has lake and shed issues as well, and clearly wants to raise her game in terms of her shed work. If you've read The Silkworm recently, and I hope we're talking to some serious strikers out there, Rowling's disdain for romantasy is neck deep. The whole thing about Catherine Kent, that, well, first of all, there's Dorcas Pengelly, who writes, pornography. What is it? And if you got your copy of Silkworm handy, Dorcas Pengelly is described as having writing pornography dressed up in historical romance, and that's one of Elizabeth Tassel's great writers. That in a children's book, right? The male children's book writer. That's the person that she goes off the retreat and throws the typewriter off the cliffs. That's what's paying her bills. Is not Owen Quine. It's the children's books writer and Dorcas Pengelly. But later on, Catherine Kent, when Strike interviews her in the center of the novel, really when we should have guessed that Elizabeth Tassel was the murderer, they talk about Catherine Kent. And Tassel says that Catherine Kent's work, which are romantic fantasy, right? She says she makes Dorcas Pengelly look like Iris Murdoch. Now, Nick, you'll have to explain who Iris Murdoch is.
So Iris Murdoch is one of the first winners of the Booker Prize, and she's written. Not that I have read her. She's on my reading list, but I haven't got round to her yet. But her great novel is called The Sea, considered one of the classics of 20th century British fiction.
Wow. Okay. So the contrast here is Dorcas Bengali is writing pornography. Of the women writers that are inside this book, we get, I mean, there's three. There's Dorcas Bengali, who's writing pornography dressed up as romantic fiction, historical fiction. And we get Catherine Kent, who's writing, just, romantasy. It's fantasy. It's not genre, as she says, it's fantasy with a lot of basically pornography inside of it. That you're going to get off on side these stories or whatever. And that's what women writers do. And we also, that's the suggestion. You get Iris Murdoch mentioned there, right? But, and the third writer is, of course, Elizabeth Tassel, who's writing this takedown piece, which is exposed in the end as being a pretty thin takedown. It doesn't have any of Quine's genius. No one's really wanting to read the fake Bombyx Mori. They want to read the real Bombyx Mori by the male author. And what Rowling is doing here is saying that, especially about romantic fantasy, especially in a character that looks a lot like her, what she would have been if she hadn't had her success with Harry Potter, is that people that read, how do I put this? Well, I mean, you get Michael Fancourt at the Chelsea Art Club talking to Strike, saying that women, what does he say here? Yeah, I can't find it here in my notes real quickly. Too many notes about another issue. Nick. That women basically can't write, and we've had hints of this before.
Yeah. That
Quine and Fancourt have a prejudice against women writers. And Fancourt comes out finally and just spills it. Oh, it's in the interview. It's in the interview where he makes the mistake about effigy and Elspeth, where he says that there are no great women writers unless they're childless. Only childless women writers can write, because women get too preoccupied with family, and so they can't do the concentrated work to make a great novel a great novel. Well, obviously Rowling is having a diss at that, but all the women novelists she puts inside the books are hacks. And none of those writers that she mentioned that are mentioned in the books, Tassel, Kent, and Pengelly, none of them have children. You have to look it up, Nick, or tell me if Iris Murdoch has children, because that would be funny, right? A Booker Prize winner that's that way. But Rowling is having her shot at people. The fact that another refrain inside the Silkworm is everybody is writing novels today, nobody is reading them, and that the women writers are writing all this romantic fiction, and there's a huge market for it. And that's just the case, that romance fiction has always been the dirty secret of publishing, and that it floats to all the boats. If you go to the New York Times bestseller list, you're going to find a Daniel Steele novel today at the top of it, and 3 or 4 of the top 20 are also romantic fiction, and that keeps things moving, and even more so on the paperback list. That's what readers are reading, and yet here's the thing: is we know the Silkworm is the Ur novel of the Cormoran Strike series. It obviously isn't the first book in the series as we have it, but Rowling has said that it was the first story, the Cormoran Strike story, that occurred to her. It's the germ out of which really the whole series grew up.
That's the one she wanted to write when she was thinking of what am I going to do next? Well,
that's the inspiration story.
Yeah.
The piece that's in there is what inspired her to write this story. And, clearly, Nick, I'm reading, as I do my reread, I'm doing this with my abortion goggles on, and we'll have to do a separate show about that. But I'm embarrassed for the people that have come out and said, oh, there's simply no evidence for this idea about the lost child and an induced abortion being the inspiration of the story. Have you read The Silkworm? I mean, seriously. I mean, it's comic. Hobart's Sin is based about whether the writer should have an abortion or follow their vocation as a writer. That's and that's the germ that goes through Bonwick's Moor, the repeated scene. That's the key to the series. How does someone accuse me of this is under evidenced and transgressive or whatever. It's nuts. Anyway, we'll have to do a whole show about that. I mean, it's really it's pathetic. But back to this. You mentioned that back in the day, this is before your time, Nick. Back in the day when Harry Potter came out, the regime of fantasy writers was basically the Tolkien Lewis cults. And again, in 2000, they were doing best novels of the 20th century. And it was a war between the critics who said the best novel of the 20th century was Joyce's Ulysses and Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings. All the popular polls had Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings as the best novel set of the 20th century. All the academics said it was either Proust or Joyce. Now that's all of those people who were Tolkien scholars. I shouldn't say all, because there are people like Amy Sturgis, who's a Tolkien scholar, who is one of the original Potter pundits. Most of the Tolkien scholars were punching down about Harry Potter, saying this is trash. This woman can't write. This woman, William Safire and company were saying these are books that are not worthy of adult attention. And all the Tolkien people were saying what a poor writer Rowling was. Harold Bloom was saying it was filled with cliches. There was nothing original about it, pedestrian prose, etc. And Rowling took that pretty personally. I mean, one of them said that she uses adverbs everywhere, and the next Potter book didn't have many adverbs in it. It was that. I mean, she was that sensitive to it.
Well, and then even Stephen King mentioned that, and he's a big fan of Rowling's writing. But even he said that Rowling had never met an adverb she didn't like.
There you go. Okay, so I mean, Stephen King, again, who Harold Bloom and company eviscerated when he was nominated for a serious, writing prize, saying, this is the end of culture if Stephen King wins a writing award. He wrote a book on how to write novels, how to write, largely, again, I think in response to the fact that he wasn't taken seriously as a writer. So here's Rowling, her work for which she's most famous was brutalized by fantasy writing snobs who said that Lord of the Rings was the greatest thing. And her only response to that was, she's a big Tolkien fan herself, was that Tolkien's a better creator of worlds than I am, but I have better jokes. Things like Uranus. That was her response to that. Was a non-response. Was she felt intimidated by that. But then Stephenie Meyer comes into the scene. And the Potter fans rejoice, because now, instead of being the people who are being attacked from above from these great critics and about the better writing involved, now they can punch down on Stephenie Meyer, because she isn't anything like the writing genius of J.K. Rowling. Really, the work that was being done by the Potter pundits in the first and second generations to show that Rowling was a writer of real accomplishment. The tools in her shed were serious tools, and she was wielding them with great skill. That didn't make anything of the impression as Meyer was a much worse writer than Rowling was, in terms of making Rowling an acceptable writer. And it's shameful. It really is shameful. But Rowling makes some comments too about, she actually distanced herself. In 2010, Rowling was invited to present an award at the Academy Awards with Stephenie Meyer. And in 2010, Rowling says, "Oh, no, far too busy with pen and paper. Can't possibly fly out for one of the great, public platforms that anybody would die for, to present an award at the, I think a writer presenting an award at the, anyway, she turns that down, I think largely, and was taken as a snub to Stephenie Meyer at the time.
I'm not surprised. I mean, we now know what she was working on in 2010. At the time, it seemed like she was in the middle of a 5-year holiday.
That's right. Melissa and Nellie, I'm breaking a confidence here. Sorry, Melissa, if I'm breaking a confidence here. But she told me at that time that she was in contact with Rowling, and Rowling said that she was never been more excited about writing. She felt like she was in the middle of a love affair. And that was when I think she was planning and drafting the Cormoran Strike series, as well as putting the final touches on Casual Vacancy. Now that's so we get that, yeah, she was a busy woman, but can't fly to California, when you haven't been in the top of the headlines for, 3 years. I mean, well, she'd been top of the headlines because the movies had still been coming out, but still that she couldn't make that trip. That was a Stephenie Meyer diss. And then we have all, Rowling doesn't like romantasy, and really romance is a big deal in Twilight. It's Team Edward or Team Jacob, and it's vampire romance with some werewolves thrown in. Now that's great. That's actually, what Rowling is doing now inside the detective thing. Yeah. She's detective romance. Rowling is obviously not a big fan of romantasy, but what she's really not a big fan of is the fan fiction stuff. When the 50 Shades of Grey stuff comes out, which is Twilight fan fiction,
yeah,
with the names removed eventually, this explodes globally. Okay, this fan fiction romantasy, okay, eventually, 50 Shades of Grey has sold 165 million copies. Almost as much or equal to what Twilight sold.
Yeah.
Okay. The fan fiction stuff eclipsed that. And Rowling was asked about it and said, no, I haven't read it. Even though it's taken over all the bestseller lists, even though it's in 2010, when this stuff started coming out, 2012, the Independent in the UK said, it's outselling Harry Potter. Now, okay. Harry Potter was 5 years old at that point, but still, it was that big a deal. And she said, no, I haven't read it. And then she said, maybe I could have sold more books if I had Harry be more creative with his wands. Right.
That was the Oprah interview, I think.
Yeah. I mean, that diss there about two things: fan fiction with sex, interlaced into it, and the whole romantasy genre with Meyer is where Rowling is punching down.
Yeah.
And I think on that August 7th tweet this year, when she says, that some writers are all alike and they get hold of a zeitgeisty thing and it takes off, they're at least self-aware enough that they need to work on their shed. That, I think, is Rowling maybe being a little more sensitive to Meyer. Still not allowing, as Lev Grossman did, that, hey, people, can we lay off how Meyer can't write? She just sold 165 million copies of her books. And those aren't just going to teenagers, teenage girls. That the market for teenage girls is not 165 million, this all came out in the open last week, Nick. The New York Times did a big piece. I think it was largely a takedown of Rowling on transgender issues. That's where it winds up. But
yeah,
the article is called "The Wizard's Everlasting Spell," in which the reporter, Alexander Alter, she shares the backstory to a Potter fan fiction piece. I think it was originally a Potter fan fiction piece under the title Manacled. Yeah. And now it's like 50 Shades of Grey, that Potter fan fiction piece, which is Dracomany. It's a Draco Hermione romantasy. It's now coming out as a novel called Alchemized, which, clearly must be a fan, Nick. Must be a fan, right? How do you think Team Rowling read that piece in America's newspaper of record?
Well, she's got a complicated relationship with fan fiction. So, she's not. If you look at all of the hosts, but I guess the largest current host for fan fiction is called Archive of Our Own, with the numeral 3 after it. So it looks like their server's been taken down at least twice. So
Archive of Our Own is called AO3 because of our own has 3 O's on it.
Okay, I was thinking maybe, wow, Team Rowling maybe they really are going for them. If you look at the stories that are on there, by some margin, Harry Potter is the largest property to have fan fictions against.
Always has been.
Twilight is there. Lots of TV shows. There's a lot of Japanese anime now, which escapes me entirely, and an awful lot of it would be termed mature content. It's effectively pornography, and fairly thinly disguised in terms of having a plot on there. It seems incredibly popular. Rowling has said that she doesn't object to fan fiction as long as it's not commercialized. That is, they don't make any money off of it, and it is not sexually explicit, because the Harry Potter book series is a series for children. She doesn't want children coming across this stuff and having their
in bookstores. Okay.
No, online. I mean, kids are online now. So if a kid is reading Harry Potter, gets really into it, discovers fan fiction, and then sees all this sexualized content, Rowling does not agree to that. But it looks like there's not a lot she can do to enforce that, because this is a rule that is breached more than it's observed. Most of them have fairly heavy disclaimers saying, this is all characters do not belong to me. This is the property of someone else. But it's a thing, and it seems incredibly popular. So yeah, I mean, you talked about the Alchemized. So in that New York Times piece you were talking about, they're talking about an initial print run for Alchemized of 750,000 copies.
Which is on par with the first runs of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, right?
So Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, famously, which is why they're so valuable now, had a first print run, and this is widely misquoted. The first print run was 1,500 copies. So the ones that will secure your retirement are the 500 hardback books that were printed in that print run. They were destined for libraries, so very few had a private purchase against them. If you've got one of those, then in mint condition, then you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then there was a 1,000, in the UK it's called paperback, it's the softback first print run. So 1,500 copies were printed. A paperback in fair condition will cost you tens of thousands of dollars today if you've got one with that initial print run against it. Just incredible. So obviously they're going to make money off it. So Alchemized has to remove all of J.K. Rowling's property, and they appear to have done that similar to the 50 Shades of Grey, is they use the character archetypes. So the characters will look like and sound like the Rowling characters. They won't be named the Rowling characters. You can be sure that the nomenclature through the book will be scrutinized extremely closely by Rowling PLC and her agent and Scholastic and Bloomsbury.
But they're not going to, even if there's no way they're standing in front of that train, because this is already such a thing, and they have the 50 Shades precedent. Wow. I mean, this is a thing, and this goes back. Potter fan fiction, Nick. Again, back in the day before you were here, Nick. Potter fan fiction was really an outgrowth of the shipping controversies. In terms of the whole Harry, Hermione, Ron, Hermione war that took place in that. I mean, you couldn't talk about really serious issues like literary alchemy and stuff like that without it. It was only relevant to a large section of fandom, with predominantly women, in terms of the romance inside the series. That they were reading Harry Potter as romantasy, and so their fan fiction reflected that.
Yes,
that's.
And I think that's the general trend in publishing now. So Bloomsbury, their next great hope after the Harry Potter series ended, and it looked almost certain that Bloomsbury was not or no longer going to be the publisher of choice of J.K. Rowling for all her subsequent books. They brought on an American author called Sarah J. Maas, who is now doing tremendous numbers, but she was always extremely big. She is now if you ignore Rowling's back catalogue, which is still doing great numbers for Bloomsbury, she is now the Bloomsbury hot property. She was brought online at about the same time that learning from past mistakes, Bloomsbury took on a US division so that they could also publish in the US. They didn't have to partner with Scholastic for this series. Wow.
I mean, this article, and I'll put a link down below. I'm not sure if I get past the paywall or not. I was sent the article by our friend David Martin, Hufflepuff hero and Potter pundit of the first rank. To say, what do you think of this, John? The article was written. I'm going to say this, Nick, and you can. I trust you as always to say, no, John, you've missed the boat again. Thank you, Nick. You haven't mentioned anything about Trelawney and McGonagall yet, but I mean,
well, I missed it when we were talking as well. So I share responsibility.
I think you decided to let me take the hit on that, Nick. You had to set me up so that people would say, wow, John Granger doesn't know that it's McGonagall who's the worst poet in English history. He thinks it's Trelawney. Why do I listen to him about anything? And you decided to let that go out. Thanks, Nick. I see you've got my back. You got my back, brother. Wow. Anyway, that was good for some face palming. Oh gosh. All right. Anyway, I trust you to say live, Nick, if you disagree with me on this issue, that article in the New York Times was largely about Potter fandom moving on without the author.
Yeah, you're right. So much was made of the fact that many of these fans don't want to be associated with Rowling property anyway, which is convenient because they can now make money off of the stories that they put onto fan fiction. You're right.
The New York Times was all on board with that. I mean, none of these anti-turf things were shown as being,
absolutely. But to me, it and this may be my prejudice as well, it seemed a little bit contrived to me. So it was tacked onto. So the story was about monetizing in the same way that E.L. James did these fan fiction stories. And it was sort of tacked on with, of course, once we remove all mentions of Rowling property, then the fans can enjoy it. And of course, these fans are staying away from well, I don't think that's true. I think if you look at the numbers of what Rowling is selling, it's really difficult to get print figures, but you can see how they're doing on Amazon. You can see how they're doing on Audible. She's still up there with current releases on the Harry Potter books. So I don't think there's a huge swell of fandom that is turning their back on J.K. Rowling. I think there's a very vocal section of the fan community that are trying to turn their backs on her. But yeah, that to me that seemed a little bit contrived.
Yeah, and it's certainly that part of fandom that's consumed by romantasy.
Yeah.
That's that article. That's all they're on board with, is they want their romance and fantasy. They're the Catherine Kent fans, not the Iris Murdoch fans, or even the J.K. Rowling fans. I think ultimately, though a large part of Rowling Galbraith fandom is consumed by romance. I mean, and she set that up. Wow. Anyway, this is. That article about basically romantasy and fan fiction and Rowling, I think Team Rowling must have gotten some wind of that, or just the fact that Alchemized is coming out.
Yeah,
this is on Rowling's mind.
So, do you think that Sturgeon piece was a reaction from Rowling to that article?
Yeah, I mean, really. The way that Rowling framed her disdain for Sturgeon by saying that she reminded her of Twilight's Bella Swan, that's a pretty bizarre connection, okay? And Rowling really invites that it's a bizarre, she highlights that this is a singular connection that only she is making. I mean, the first paragraph of this article, it came out 14 August, and it really just, 10 days ago, 11 days ago. The Twilight of Nikola Sturgeon, J.K. Rowling reviews frankly, which is Sturgeon's memoir of a life in progress. And it starts off, let me read this. I know I'm stating the obvious, and I'll probably be one of countless reviewers making the same point, but it's impossible to read Nikola Sturgeon's memoir without remembering the smash hit fictional franchise Twilight by Stephenie Meyer. For those who don't know, i.e. everyone who wasn't a tween or teenage girl or living with one 2005 to 2015, Twilight was massively popular for roughly a decade, each new book or film being greeted adoringly by its devoted fans. And then she goes into this. Well, I mean, you can cut the sarcasm there with a knife, right? I mean, nobody picks up Frankly and thinks of Twilight. Nobody. And yet, Rowling puts that into her headline, The Twilight of Nikola Sturgeon, and leads with this comparison between, teen Bella Swan and teen Nikola Sturgeon. I mean, this is preposterous. And it's also, again, preposterous and punching down to say that the Twilight thing was only about tween girls. You don't do, Meyer is on the list of the 20 richest authors in the world today, even though her several books after Twilight haven't sold at all. Okay, she's still above Suzanne Collins, whose franchises have continued to expand and sell very well. Twilight is a living, dynamic thing, and Rowling is basically saying, it was a historical thing, and it was a flash in the pond. It's a flash in the pond, dear. I mean, I think she's still bitter about the fact that people were comparing Meyer and Rowling. I think she should be grateful that they were comparing Meyer and Rowling, because she always came off very well in that comparison, and they'd stopped comparing Rowling to Tolkien, in which comparison that I think she knew she suffered. Wow. So yeah, Nick, this. Okay, so why is she doing this? Why is she doing this? Why does she bring up Twilight in this piece, which is going to be read globally? It's basically, some of Rowling's most acerbic and pointed writing she's ever done, which is saying something. That's pretty high bar standard. I mean, that takedown in that review of Nikola Sturgeon, and that's gonna leave marks forever on Nikola Sturgeon. All right. Why does she lead with Twilight in there? I think, first of all, there's the desire to associate the regime feminist and gender theory front person, Sturgeon, with something that Rowling thinks of as childish and stupid. She's trying to belittle Sturgeon as openly and in a way that she thinks everybody will see as a hit, to say that she's like a character in a Stephenie Meyer novel. To her, there can't be anything lower than that. That's Dorcas Pengelly, Catherine Kent. That's way down there, okay? And then there's also a desire I think in the wake of things like Alchemized and the growth of this fan fiction market, it's about to swell and burst into the public at the top of the bestseller lists. She's trying to separate herself from the romantasy books that are about to be on the top of the New York Times bestseller list. I mean, she feels that she's being linked with books like Twilight. She hates it, and therefore she weaponizes it here to say, I'm not like that. Now, the funny thing here, to me, Nick, at least, is that the prevalent understanding of Rowling's work at the height of Pottermania was almost exactly the patronizing and condescending attitude toward the work and those enthusiastic about it that Rowling now is showing toward Twilight and the legions, the millions of Twihards. I mean, you came late to the party, but what of your research has made you familiar with that period in Rowling's life story?
Well, it's even from the very early days. As soon as there was a buzz about Harry Potter, and there were pictures in the newspapers, famously in the Telegraph, of kids queuing outside a bookshop to get the next Sorcerer's Stone. She won the Smarties Prize. As soon as this buzz started, then the literary and even the children's literary establishment couldn't say a nice thing about her. So Raymond Briggs, author of the beloved The Snowman, said he was not. He's read Rowling's work and he's not a fan. And Rowling said it's such a shame that if an author I didn't admire criticized me, then I could ignore it. So it's upsetting when someone I admire says something like this. But this was all fairly short-lived. When it became plain that Rowling was not going to go away, and actually this was going to be a phenomenon the like of which we had never seen and likely will never see again. The big gun critics were the literary establishment. And so I have a selection of the more famous ones. So Harold Bloom, who is a giant in literary criticism,
a legitimate giant,
yeah. In terms of the Western canon, you go to Harold Bloom to see what he says about what is in, what is out of the great books. So. This is what he says about Rowling's writing. The writing was dreadful. The book was terrible. As I read, I noticed that every time a character went for a walk, the author wrote instead that the character stretched his legs. I began marking on the back of an envelope every time that phrase was repeated. I stopped only after I had marked the envelope several dozen times. I was incredulous. Rowling's mind is so governed by cliches and dead metaphors that she has no other style of writing. You may have guessed, John, that I've chosen those paragraphs that I can most easily mock. So it's quite clear that Harold Bloom has not read Sorcerer's Stone, because I have an electronic version of the book which allows me to do word searches. And I can see that the phrase stretched his legs has been used exactly once in that book. On page 4, which Harold Bloom comes back to. And it's described as something that Mr. Dursley does, that most cliched of characters. So no, I don't know quite what Harold was marking down on the back of that envelope, but it wasn't the phrase stretched your legs.
Really? It's so. I'm going to break in here. It's so sad.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, believe me, I was involved in this. Maybe we'll talk about that. But I mean, I had to basically, as a nobody know nothing, I had to go against the likes. People just say Harold Bloom, John, says it's trash.
Yeah.
And you're saying that it's Shakespearean. Really.
Can 50 million readers be wrong?
Yes.
Yes, he said.
According to Harold Bloom, yeah. Oh, gosh. And I'm sorry to interrupt.
No,
Harold Bloom was a great literary critic, and
yes,
there's some feminists have said unkind things about him. Camille Paglia, Harold Bloom was her thesis advisor. Harold Bloom made Camille Paglia. Wow. Anyway, still, just it's too bad that he'll be remembered for those words, those paragraphs, Nick, and not for his genius and his.
Yeah, you're right, and a prodigious reader. His method of reading is something that I've unconsciously copied, because he was also a prodigious rereader. He never if he thought a book had merit, he never read it once. He's always going back to it, which is something that I'm trying to develop as well. Okay, so we mentioned Iris Murdoch. A.S. Byatt is another great female literary UK figure, another Booker Prize winner with Possession, a book I've read, a book I love, wonderful writer. So she says, Ms. Rowling's magic world has no place for the numinous. Really? Again? Have you read the book? It's written for people whose imaginative lives are confined to TV cartoons. And the exaggerated, more exciting, not threatening mirror worlds of soaps, reality TV, and celebrity gossip. No big themes in these books, John. That's the problem. There's no big themes.
Now, the Byatt thing is I don't know if you're I'm sorry to jump in here. I don't know what you're about to say, whatever. But there was an article in Salon that it was called A.S. Byatt and the Goblet of Bile, in which Byatt was basically exposed as a jealous writer, that just couldn't deal with this. It had no clue about what Rowling was doing inside the work. I mean, that's relatively. Byatt comes out relatively late in the game. I think the fourth or fifth books are already out. I'm just like, wow, you're just walking right into. But by that point, the Potter punditry, we'd established that these were works of some fine writing. But wow, A.S. Byatt. Whew.
Yeah, I mean, yes. So A.S. Byatt essentially misses, aside from missing the numinous. I mean, the point of the hero's journey and the spiritual growth and perfection of Harry Potter and the soul triptych trio through the series entirely escapes her. She claims nobody is trying to save or destroy anything beyond Harry Potter and his friends and family. Again, it makes you wonder what she was reading. But I think the earliest of the ones I've found, and it's a guy that I'm not familiar with, but William Safire.
Yeah, New York Times editorial writer. Yeah, The Power at the Gray Lady. Yeah, William Safire. Whew.
So
cultural Nick, you should know he was a cultural gatekeeper about use of language. He wrote books on syntax and grammar, things like that. I mean, and really a funny, biting, a very intelligent man.
So he wrote a piece, and it was when Order of the Phoenix won in the Whitbread Book Awards, won the best children's book. And it was up against Beowulf.
The translation,
the new translation of Beowulf. And I'm trying to remember who the translator was.
Yeah, I can go to my library, Nick, and pull it down for you.
No, that's fine. I mean, a critically acclaimed translation.
Best translation since Tolkien, and brilliant.
Yes, but by a noted poet whose name escapes me. And there were a few articles in the UK press about some of the judges were threatening to resign if Rowling was chosen ahead of of Beowulf. And Sapphire writes, it's about time Potter was pipped, narrowly defeated. His creator, Ms. Rowling, deserved the lesser award she received for best children's book, but let us not exalt Potter either as a cultural icon. Adults make a part of their lives only the works that have meaning. Remember Dorothy in her transforming ruby slippers in The Wizard of Oz, Frank Baum's book? Its symbols became part of our culture. Munchkins presumed to advise candidates following the yellow brick road to power, and behind the curtain we discover the fearsome Wizard of Bombast is only a frightened Frank Morgan. For adults, Harry Potter may reign over the bestseller list, but he has yet to heave his philosopher's stone over the rainbow. So Sapphire is saying, it's great, it's a good children's book, the kids are enjoying it, but let's be real, it's not going to have the enduring power of The Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, and Sapphire was there early saying exactly the same thing, saying these books are unworthy of adult attention.
But this is, I guess it's the natural human reaction to something that is popular, to popular culture. If you have set your stall as being a member of an elite establishment, like Bloom, like Sapphire, like Bayet, you are not writing romantasy. You're not writing romance novels. You are in the business of culture. So if it's popular culture, it can't be good.
Because James Thomas, who I mentioned earlier, was quoted in Time magazine about this, saying that there were, I heard him say it at a convention earlier, but that he said that there are 3 deathly hallows in literary criticism: if it's popular, if it's juvenile, and if it's current. And obviously Harry Potter was the trifecta. It was current, popular, and children could read it. They couldn't read it at depth, but they could read it, And therefore, this can't possibly be candidate for the canon. Amazing.
But I think, now we're 25 years on. So these books are not going away. There's a lot of serious work that has gone into studying these books, and I think this is a push, John, that you've led. So you've been termed the Dean of Harry Potter scholars, and I think deservedly, because practically from day one from John Granger reading these books, you took it seriously to try and understand how they work, to try and understand why they have the effect on the popular imagination that they do.
Yeah, and the battle now in Rowling criticism is interior rather than exterior. The Academy protests have largely folded, and acknowledge Rowling as a leader. She's in the power phase. You talk about this in terms of the phases of her life.
Yeah.
She's considered to be a leading writer on the merits now. It's not just that there, and people forget the history you just reviewed. And when I'm called the Dean of Harry Potter scholars, it's because there was a team effort of I may have been in the leading position by default, but Michael Marr, who's a Nabokov scholar of the first rank, and Amy Sturgis, they were both teaching Harry Potter classes at prestige universities in 2000. And that took what we call stones, Nick, not philosopher's stones, but that took stones, because the consensus in the academy was this was trash. There was Stratford and Leone Caldecott. Stratford's no longer with us, but Stratford and Leone Caldecott, Tolkien scholars of first tier, first rank. They were on board with Harry Potter as being serious fiction. Lana Whitehead, good friend of this blog, and we don't agree on much except that we admire each other's work. But Lana was there. She put out was with the Ivory Tower and Harry Potter, the first anthology, and she sort of bracketed really the first and fourth generations by putting out a second volume of that type of criticism. Recently, there was Karen Westman, who did all the original work really with Jane Austen. That first generation Potter Pundit Hall of Fame, okay, while the cultural warriors and the academic gatekeepers were all singing the same song, that Potter was trash, read by idiots, dangerous to their minds and hearts, a small group of serious readers pushed back. We wrote books on the subject. We did public debates. We went to fan cons, and really Harry Potter Educational Fan-On. That was the meeting place for academics that were on Team Rowling to meet and to discuss with fans the seriousness of the books. Okay, and I was my book was Hidden Key to Harry Potter that came out in 2002. Was the first book that said these books have real merit and real depth, that she's using tools that aren't the tools you use if you're writing slop, as I think Bloom used the word slop at one point for her work.
But that was pretty groundbreaking at the time. I mean, you talk about hidden keys for Harry Potter. So that introduced really literary alchemy to the study of Harry Potter.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a very, to go all Gilderoy here, right? I mean, but just give you an idea of what it was like then. Steve Van Drak, the head of the Harry Potter lexicon, at that point was teaching at a Christian private school, high school, as a media specialist. And the Harry Potter lexicon was turning into what it is today, which is the online resource for all things Harry Potter. I mean, Rowling even used it, gave it an award. I mean, Harry Potter lexicon, especially during the Potter mania days, was invaluable. But Steve was in danger of being fired because he was at a Christian school, and all the parents were saying, "We got a guy in here that's putting the gateway to the occult, online and promoting it." And I sent Steve a copy, I don't know how he got a copy. Steve got a copy of Hidden Key to Harry Potter, and we've started to correspond almost immediately. And he told me he went into his headmaster's office and put that book on his desk and said, read this, because in the book I detailed that, the reason the books are so popular is because of their Christian content, because of their symbolic weight, that Rowling has overloaded these books with the Christian menagerie of symbols. And if you don't get that Harry, rises from the dead in the presence of a symbol of Christ in every single book, we only had 4 at that point, you don't understand, the power these books are having on their readers. And to Steve, that was a life-saving moment. I was like, whoa. So Steve, put up a review of my book, and he didn't have any other books. The lexicon didn't promote books, but he put up a review of my book on the lexicon, little tag on the front page of the site. And all of a sudden, my book sales just exploded. And Steve was on the board of HPEF, and I got invited to Orlando, and I gave a talk on literary alchemy there, and that just took things global. Those were bizarre times. Those were bizarre times, and I was free. I was unemployed yurt sower, Nick, on the Olympic Peninsula with 7 kids, and only I kept waiting for an academic to jump in and say all the things I was saying, and none of them were doing it.
No,
because the academics didn't get on board with the alchemy thing until we found that interview from 1998, which was in 2007. And many of them didn't get on board, Nick, until you had that tattoo on her wrist.
Yeah. She literally had to tattoo it on her body for people to believe that this was a thing.
Yeah. Well, several years before that, I had written that, hey, you can't miss it. This here it is. You can't read these books without literary alchemy. In fact, the phrase literary alchemy didn't exist in the context that it's now used until I used it that way in that book. It had been used before, but not that way. Certainly, the field existed about Hermetic literature. Certainly there had been books written about literary alchemy. There's Stanton Linden's work, which is the gold standard. He wrote Dark Hieroglyphics, Alchemy in English Literature from Chaucer to the Restoration. He doesn't use the phrase literary alchemy. He talks about the two types of alchemy in literature, and you really didn't read that book to see the tradition that Rowling is drawing on. But yeah, Hidden Key to Harry Potter thrusts the Christian symbolism, thrusts the
soul allegory.
Yeah, the psychomachia in terms of the soul triptych that goes through, and in tradition from Plato through Tolkien, all that stuff is brought up there.
And then you wrote Deathly Hallows lectures.
Yeah, I mean that's when we get into the whole Coleridgean elements, in the work, and the mythological backdrop. The stuff I wrote at Hogwarts Professor at that point about what she was doing with the Aeschylus that she talks about in the epigraphs, and how important that was. I mean that's.
But I mean you don't stop there. So then we come on to your discovery of Rowling and ring composition and the ring cycle and the structural artistry that she uses. I mean that's the big question for me. Is so much of this now is obvious. So literary alchemy, even the people that were being willfully blind can't deny literary alchemy now that she's tattooed Solve et Coagula on her hand. Once it's been explained to you more than a couple of times in more than a couple of different contexts, you can't deny the structure and the ring cycle. The Christian symbolism is now it's so obvious. So sometimes it doesn't even get a mention. It's so obvious, but they weren't obvious. They weren't obvious until you saw them. So the $64,000 question, John, is how? How do you do this consistently?
Okay. Wow. That is a great question, Nick. And before we get into that, though, you got to really get to the point where why haven't people asked that question previously? Why are we inside these internal battles in terms of, Rowling Galbraith criticism? Why is there like no deference to work being done? And that's something that you mentioned that it's like we've always known that.
Yeah.
That's it's in reference to Walker Percy, great American writer, who in a joking aside once said there's 3 stages of scientific discovery. That's a heresy and you should be thrown in jail. It's idiocy. No one can possibly believe that. And the next stage is, maybe there's something to it, but it will take decades of research to confirm. And it's still an outlier idea that only, people that can't stay inside the lines are thinking about, conspiracy theorists maybe. And then the third stage is, we've always known that. All the people that were crucified in the first stage and then belittled in the second stage are dismissed in the third stage, as we've always known that. So you'll see things. You can go online and you'll see see, well, first of all, there was the plagiarism thing where people published a book where they used my ring cycle things and didn't give me no reference to the work that I'd done. That was just wild. They stopped that series. And then there was, a couple of weeks ago, there was a thing on one of the strike fandom sites where they took the Twitter headers and they put a picture of it online. They said, some people think there may be something to like ring composition ideas. I was just like, what have I become? He who must not be named. This is too funny. It's pathetic. It's hilarious. But why did I come up with those things? I've got an honors degree from the University of Chicago, and I had incredible mentors there in addition to the classes that I took. And I walked away from there with an idea of the history of ideas, that the history of ideas is an important thing, and that there's a break inside the history of ideas between traditional cultures and modern culture, which is to say, really, the modern West, from the nominalist period of high scholasticism forward, where you see rationality become this supreme human cognitive ability, rather than the noetic faculty, which is sometimes called your cardiac intelligence, your heart in Scripture. And all traditional cultures are about that faculty. And Coleridge becomes the man who tries to protect that. And the entire English fantasy tradition springs out of Coleridge's defense of the imagination as that noetic faculty. And I was immersed in that at Chicago, and through the readings that my mentors encouraged me to do in a school of thought called the Perennialists, because that's where they live, and that understanding that break between tradition and modernity. And one of the several of the most important Perennialists, specifically a Ceylonese man, Ananda Kentish Kumaraswamy, English mother, Ceylonese father, educated in the UK. Eventually becomes the head of the Boston Art Museum. And he writes about art and literature in terms of perennialist ideas. The next generation is Martin Lings, who does most of the work with Shakespeare. Those writers talked about psychomachia, talked about literary alchemy. Mircea Eliade's idea really offered as an aside inside his landmark work, the Sacred and the Profane, that in a secular culture, literature and all story, to include film, serves a mythic or religious function. That basically, when God has been pushed out of the public square, because the human being is designed with this spiritual capacity at its center, story fills that gap. That the public square's atheism starves that faculty of oxygen. Literature provides it. And the stories we like the most, which is sort of the Granger addendum or ancillary part to the Eliade thesis, is that the stories that serve that function the best, providing oxygen to the spiritual capacity, which is your imagination, those stories are the most popular stories. Those are the ones that sell the best and are remembered the best, treasured, really. That was what I was trying to do when I read Harry Potter, was figure out, why do people love these stories? I'm coming from, a Chicago perennialist background in the great books, and this idea of a division, that's the landmark figure really in literature is Coleridge. That he's saying this is what this is about, and he champions fantasy as the best means, because of the power of symbolism, to reach that cardiac intelligence, how we read. And so when I started to read the books and try to figure out, why do people love these stories, which is still why I read these books, and offer my opinions on them, is to figure out why we love them the way we do. That's what I recognized that other people didn't recognize, because they didn't have that background, were the traditional tools. if you've never seen Soul Allegory, if you haven't read Plato's Phaedrus, if you haven't read, if you're unaware of psychomachy, if you're unaware of literary alchemy, if you're unaware of chiastic structure, if you're a classics major, every line of Virgil and Homer has a chiastic point in it. I mean, you have chiasm beat into your head, Nick. It's not something that I found, hidden in a library somewhere in the back. It was somewhere where they hit me over the head with a club for 4 years. So when I read those books, I got it. I didn't get the structure until 2010. Shame on me. And other people were already talking about the series structure that way. So again, this is not John as genius. This is John, only able to see through these lenses, finding these things because Rowling was using those tools. Okay, and really, Nick, I mean, the tools are such that when you see literary alchemy inside the work, which is fairly transparent. The title of the first book is Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, and one of the key figures is a master alchemist. That should be a point of that's a strong indicator, Nick, that we're talking about literary alchemy. All right, so if you look on Rowling's wall, you don't see my record albums. You see literary alchemy. You see psychomachia, you see a ton of Christian symbolism, you see mythological templates, and Kumaraswamy really talked about the depth of myth in terms of psychological transformation and why people told these stories. That was the heart of the perennialist thing. And then you stumble upon ring composition in addition, which, Mary Douglas, no less, has said is the structure across all cultures, across millennia, across all authors. That's the way storytellers tell story effectively. You see, those are the tools on the wall. Nick, this is like you go into a guy's shed and he's got a jackhammer in there for busting concrete sidewalks. What do you think that guy does for a living? There's no other tools in the shed. This guy,
ice sculpture.
Yeah, that's what that guy does. Because you know what? If you've been taught in school that the best stories are about ice sculpture, and that's what you have to read through that lens. It's all about themes, Nick. It's all about themes. It's all about morality. I mean, that's what you're going to see. Well, I see those tools on her shed, and I'm like, she's about transformation of soul. It's contact with spirit, and it's elevation. It's basically it's deification in story. It's conquering death through love. That's what that tool set says when you look at Rowling. Now, Nick, you're the person that I was writing for because you're the reader who wanted to know the how and why of Rowling's ability to engage them as she does with her story. The how to read is a function and seeing at 4 levels. I've talked too much. You want to try to explain some of that? That's...
So the piece I wrote a couple of weeks ago. So I said your book, and it's the first book of yours that I read was Harry Potter's bookshelf. So first of all, I said it taught me what to read. So alongside Beatrice Grove's Literary Illusions, it's a great source of what are the great books that are out there. But what B's book doesn't do, but yours does, is it also shows you how to read. Now, I'm not saying there's a right way to read and there's a wrong way to read, but I was searching for, as you said, I was searching for understanding. I was searching to find out how these books worked. But you explained that they work on 4 levels, and I was really only seeing them on a conscious level, on 1, maybe 2 different levels. So there's the surface level, and that literary magic that I found, where I found myself sinking into the story. The words were disappearing, and I was being completely consumed by these books, and that's true of Harry Potter, certainly, which is the point at which I found your books. Is also true of Casual Vacancy, and I find it true even now when I'm reading Cormoran Strike. But that's a surface level. I'm getting the plot, I'm getting the characters. If I'm really paying attention, I can see some of the second level, which is the moral level of the story. But without help, that's as far as I was going. And so the next level, the allegorical level, and then the anagogical level.
The leading back.
So they were the levels that I was experiencing, but not consciously seeing. So the allegorical moves you. So it's going to the ancient heart of stories. That's what moves you emotionally. The anagogical, that's what changes you. So that is the spiritual heart of the story, which I couldn't see without a guide, and it's true to this day. So when we have recently read a book, so after The Running Grave came out, and John and I were talking about it, I still need a guide because I haven't got John's experience. So when we were talking about the early chapters of the book, and John said, "Well, you saw the Cupid reference, didn't you?" No. He brought bows and arrows for the boys. Of course. Having a guide like that is so important, but also just the knowing what you should be, even if you don't see it, knowing what you should be looking for. And for me, that's the value of the reread, which until I'd read Harry Potter's bookshelf, I was most conscious of how poorly read I was. I was already using bookshelf and literary illusions as a guide. I was writing out very ambitious reading lists, knowing what I needed to read. But there was nothing in there. There was no room or time in there for you read it once for the surface and the moral, and then you go back and then you try and understand how it works.
You go back if you were moved because the author was writing at those levels.
Yes, absolutely. So there's not everything. I have two lists. I have a reading list and I have a rereading list. And I try and alternate a read with a reread. And not every book I read finds its way onto my reread list. So Anthony Powell, I was on to volume 4, I think partway through volume 4, before that series found its way, because I was reading them wrong. Then when I understood what he was trying to do, and I was getting moved by those books, then they found their way onto the rereading list. But yeah, that was all with you. And we weren't talking back then. I was still quite shy. Maybe put a couple of comments onto the Hog Pro message board. But it was your book taught me how to do this.
I mean, this is. I mean, first, I want to just right up front say that you're wrong. Because isn't that what we do, Nick? I mean, yeah. Nick, you're wrong. When people talk about they're not being a right way or a wrong way to read. I'm not going to say there's a wrong way to read, but I'm going to say there's a good and a better and a best way to read. And the reason that the 4 levels of reading is the best way to read, I'm going to say you're wrong, Nick. Because that's what we do here. I'm not going to say there's a right way and a wrong way to read, because if you're reading at all, you're exercising this imaginative faculty, and that's edifying. Some would say even when you're reading pornography. I wouldn't go that far, but I mean it's still you're exercising this faculty, which doesn't get certainly film doesn't exercise that faculty. Film is simply sense perception.
Yeah,
it's why it's a materialist culture's medium of choice. But that the reason that reading at 4 levels is the best way to read, it's a good, better, and best way to read. The reason that the reading at 4 levels is the best way to read is because it's tied to how people know anything. I'm not going to, I'll go into this in much greater depth in the future, but I've already gone to it in great depth in that book that you're talking about. But, the surface level is sense perception. The moral level is your opinion. It's advantage, disadvantage, fight or flight type thing. The allegorical level is a level of science where you look through the data and you see the principle behind it. The way you look through allegory and see the greater, referent that it the archetype that it refers to. And then the anagogical is the level of wisdom, which is it's not knowledge that you have. It's knowledge that you are, that you become. It transforms you. And when a writer has those tools that I'm talking about in the shed, they're going for that depth. I mean, Flannery O'Connor said, if a book doesn't work on the anagogical, it's not going to last. It's not going to really touch the human heart, which again is this logos faculty inside the human person. If it doesn't touch that, it's not a story worthy of the name. And all these writers that are very good do that. But the Academy today can't acknowledge the allegorical and anagogical because it requires acknowledging the existence of supernatural reference and a supernatural capacity inside the human being. So when you read criticism that's stuck at the surface and the moral levels, that's because that's where the Academy stops. That's all they've been taught is what books are about. And that all of their feelings about the books, they don't have the tools or even the capacity, they don't have the knowledge to understand that that's where they're really being moved. And so when they see somebody writing about those tools and things like that, they think that's hoity-toity, stuff. When in fact, it's really the power of the story.
And I think this is why I'm so excited that the poll on the Substack for how we're going to read Hallmarked Man is in favor of the reread. So we're going to do this, read it through, and I will be picking up the surface and as much of the moral layer as I can, and then
come on, Nick, you know what, you could do the whole thing.
Look, I mean, I say this as a normal human being. This is how I read books. I'm conscious that I'm talking to a man who, when he read Running Grave for the first time, charted out its entire structure. Just that's unbelievable to me. I mean, as well as a mammoth piece of work.
Well, we're not doing it again, Nick. We're not doing it again.
So this will be a group activity.
Yeah.
So what are we going to say? Are we going to give ourselves a week to read through?
Yeah. Some people have jobs, and this big book being released on a Tuesday means that most people aren't going to get through this until the weekend. So I'm gonna post the usual subjects at the Hogwarts Professor's the weblog, so people can comment freely there. Things like the gaffes, because they're going to be gaffes, Nick. I don't care how many years we have in between books. There's going to be gaffes inside this thing, and we know that there's going to be literary alchemy. We know that there may be casual vacancy echoes if Evan Willis is right, and his theory is pretty good. Yeah. We know that there's going to be Christian symbolism, Christian content inside these things. I was rereading the Silkworm, and I was amazed the number of crosses that are inside there. I mean, they're just so subtly embedded inside these things. And then so that week, those people that have read it in a day, that read it overnight, God bless us. I'll probably be one of those people. We can write about those things there. Yeah. I'll probably be writing things at the Substack site for paid subscribers, and for we won't be doing any conversations though between you and me, Nick, until you've read the whole book.
Oh yeah.
I'll be probably starting to do that, and then after we've given it a week, we'll start the conversation, and we'll start using the tools, and we'll start talking about what it means. And those people that want to join us on that's going to be a lot of fun. Rowling is, to go full circle on this conversation, Rowling's books are not about the romance in them. She seems to be working really hard to distance herself from the romance. She knows that, I mean, she's obviously written the Cormoran Strike novels with the romance at the center. But she has really kind of a patronizing and condescending attitude towards those of her readers that are stuck there, that are talking about it there. You know,
it's a difficult balance. I mean, there's been comments on Twitter now. We're on volume 8, and the books are coming out in 1,000-page editions. This is a real achievement to keep the jeopardy and the interest in a romance up this long. I mean, I'm as excited as everyone just to see, can she carry on with the jeopardy? I mean, is she going to let it happen? Is she going to turn it entirely platonic and not have howls of disappointment throughout the fandom? It's fascinating to watch.
I read one tweet where a woman said, if this is another 1,000-page novel, basically, and there's no bedroom scene, I'm done. You know, and I mean, this must be a UK thing. You use the word jeopardy. Yeah. I think in the US we would say suspense.
Yeah.
You know, that she's how long can you hang on that cliff? And I think Rowling, I mean, a good friend of mine has written a thing saying that Rowling's going to take this all the way out through the series, that they're going to have that platonic relationship. I think that's a serious possibility. And I respect this guy. He seems to have read the books pretty closely, and he knows that her life story, and that maybe she's doing her ultimate hat tip to Sean Harris to say that no.
I'll tell you what, if she can do that and keep the readers with her, that I take my hat off.
Yeah, no one's going to go there, Nick, and say that we're going to go all 10 books without there being a clinch somewhere along the way. But I would love it if she did, because that would be her ultimate saying, you know, romantasy or just romance novels have a limit, that Shakespearean romance, just like Shakespeare's use of twins, is about the soul and the spirit. And the marriages never really happen on stage. You know, you get engagements and then they go off stage.
And there's a powerful argument, I guess, that I mean, they're called romantasy. I mean, a lot of them are fairly thinly described, concealed pornography. There's a powerful argument that actually, if you're talking about romance, what's important is the relationships, and is the love and the regard and the friendships, and the physical side of it is the least important, least engaging part of it. Yeah. But we'll see.
Yeah, I'm happy. I'm delighted if she takes this thing all the way out. Her recent comments, though, suggest that something is going to happen inside this book, Nick.
Yeah, but as always with J.K. Rowling, that was more of a question than a statement.
Yes,
I mean, they've got to do something, right? Anyway, I mean, John, we'll we got a week to go. We'll have another chat, I guess, before the book is released. And
Absolutely.
then it'll be happy reading time, everyone.
Wow. It's always very exciting, a new book. It's always very exciting.
Yeah.
I am going to put down below something I wrote before Ink Black Heart, where I said, look, lay off with the predictions. The predictions are stupid. Because we have 20 books and none of the predictions have ever played out. You know, maybe you can make deductions from Twitter headers, you know, fine. But predictions from text, the only value in making predictions is if you're using the tools that we know Rowling uses. And so the best way to prepare for Rowling's books is to review the tools. And so when you're reading the book, even for the first time, you say, there it is, you know? Like when you read The Silkworm, and at the end of it, you know, strikes out in the garden with Fancourt, and he's looking at a Cupid, a statue of Cupid in the garden. You know, you're just like, oh, yeah, there we are. You know, that's it's like, oh, that's to say, oh yeah, we're working within a you know, the Cupid and Psyche, the spirit and the soul in love, overcoming death. That's what the story is really about. So I'll put a link down below, and those tools are still the tools that she uses. You can review those before you get to Hallmarked Man.
Right. Okay. Thank you, John.
Thank you.